So today we start JavaScript class, and definitely sooner or later, if I don't mention that topic, people will come and reach me after the class and say, you know what is it? Okay, should I know that? Or essentially, you know, how well should I know this? Okay. With other words, what's the JavaScript role in my resume? With other words, okay. So should I know it quite well and then put in my resume so I'll be attractive, or it's kind of an introductory course? Have a look at that, you know, just get a taste of it and then get rid of it. Okay. So it's actually it depends when you ask. If you ask me that, say 6 years ago, the answer will be completely different. Okay, I'll say, you know, that's introductory course. Just have a look at that, see how it works. That will be very good introduction to the programming languages if you never been exposed to the programming languages. Okay, because many of you, I assume, never seen programming languages which allow you to do some calculations or whatever operations with the data and so on. Okay, but situation changed. Situation changed in the sense that JavaScript now is becoming more and more popular to the tremendous extent, which is could not be predicted several years ago, and it's now everywhere. Okay, if you're working in a web environment, definitely you cannot avoid using JavaScript. Okay, that's one area. The second is if you are working with some automation tools like Selenium or Test Complete. These tools actually support JavaScript. If you know JavaScript, you can use JavaScript knowledge to create automation scripts on these tools. And the third, but not last, definitely, is JavaScript libraries where actually frameworks were developed, which are not only living on browsers. We are going to cover these topics. They are not living on browsers, but they are living also on servers. And the testing of servers also is a very important subject of its own. So it means that there is more and more demand for the JavaScript. Okay, so it's very difficult to find a developer nowadays who can quite well JavaScript, can code JavaScript quite well. I know that. It's a very huge demand here in Silicon Valley. And if there is a demand for developers, definitely there is demand for engineers knowing JavaScript. Okay, so look from that perspective. On the other hand, I should warn you that this is a programming language. Okay, so don't take it lightly. It means that in order to learn that, you have to spend a lot of sleepless nights if you like to dig deeper into that. Okay, so it's not just coming. Experience is not coming by just browsing the slides and saying, "Oh yeah, I know that." Okay, something like that. No way. Okay, it's a programming language which requires time and dedication. Okay, now for many of you, this might be kind of an introductory class to the programming language. It's kind of beginning programming class. So look at this JavaScript from that point of view. Okay, at the beginning. But if you like to go deeper, there are books which I can recommend later on, which you can specialize. If you like, you can just grab these books and learn yourself. Okay. How attractive you'll be if you put JavaScript on your resume? Definitely, some companies will pay attention to, but don't expect that if you put JavaScript, it will be the same effect as Java. Okay. So definitely, it will be to the lesser extent, but nevertheless, as I said, you know, the demand is on the rise. So for developers, definitely that will be same for QA engineers. Okay. Any questions? So okay. So far, so good. Let's go move ahead. So these are class objectives. You should understand the basics of JavaScript. I would say classic JavaScript. We are not covering frameworks and JavaScript libraries. We are covering classic JavaScript. Learn where JavaScript is used, mainly in browsers. We are not covering server side. We don't have time for that. You should be able to answer interview questions, because if you put the JavaScript on your resume, definitely you should be ready to be asked JavaScript questions, right, during the interview. And you should be able to test web pages containing JavaScript more intelligently, okay, especially pages which contain Ajax technology and so on. Okay, and nowadays it's a very popular technology. It's a hot area, so you should be able to look deeper into that and then see what happens, what's going on. Okay. So let's start with the JavaScript, the definition of what the JavaScript is. So JavaScript is the scripting language of the web. It means that if you see any scripting language in a browser, in the web pages, that most probably will be JavaScript. So technologies allow us to put other languages as well, but most probably that will be JavaScript. So JavaScript is used in many web pages, and it basically allows us to add functionality, make pages interactive, and we can validate the forms. This is actually a very important aspect of JavaScript. We can validate the forms on fly, and we can detect browsers and do much more. Okay, these are basically very few important aspects where JavaScript are used and why JavaScript is used. Okay. Now, the intention of JavaScript is to add interactivity to the HTML pages. Okay, that's how they created JavaScript. And when they created JavaScript, they had very few goals in mind. For example, the very first JavaScript, which were created in '95, was just to show pop-up window. Okay, just create a pop-up, or show alert messages, or basically interact with the browser, adding some informational messages at the bottom of the browser and at the top of the browser. Very simple actions. And at the beginning, it was not very popular because it may be looking cool for the teenagers, but for the adult developers and actually internet community, it is kind of might be ugly. Okay, especially the pop-ups and so on. But with the time, it's actually developed to the very full-blown language, and nowadays a lot of things can be done with the JavaScript, and now it's a kind of integral part of the web. Okay, we cannot imagine web without JavaScript. So, and it's scripting language. It's lightweight programming language. What scripting language means is that, unlike other languages, unlike compiling languages, when you create a code, when you actually write down your instructions what to do, you don't need to convert these instructions into the machine code. Basically, you don't need to convert it. Okay, these instructions remain as is. And then when it comes time to fulfill these instructions, to actually follow these instructions, browser is relying on some module which is called interpreter, which actually interpreting these instructions and provide information for the browser so browser can act on the browser language. Okay? So we don't need to compile it, with other words, we don't need to convert it into the machine code. Most common place to find JavaScript is embedded in HTML pages. It means that if you open an HTML page, you will find JavaScript sitting there. Okay? So what it means also is that when you navigate to some site which has JavaScript on their page, then you download that page locally, right? That page comes to your machine and then you view it. So you, together with the HTML code, you're also downloading JavaScript code. It means that the JavaScript is coming with the HTML page and executed on your very browser. Okay, so not on a server. So we're going to see examples of that, but that's very important point to mention here. And as already said, JavaScript is an interpreted language. It means that we don't need to do compilation and convert the instructions to the machine code. And the interpreter is located in your browser, and it's an integral part of the browser. You cannot take out that interpreter from the browser because it's a part of the browser. But nevertheless, this module exists there. Okay? So in order to distinguish between interpreted language and compiled languages, the situation is pretty much the same as with interpreters and the United Nations. Okay? United Nations employ synchronous interpreters and also a whole bunch of other interpreters who are sitting and translating the documents. And the United Nations, they have 5 official languages there, so it means that they have to have an army of interpreters there. Synchronous interpreters actually can translate the text on the fly. Basically, they hear to the speaker or to some important person, and they can immediately translate that on the fly just with the same real-time frame. So this can be compared with the JavaScript is interpreted. Okay, basically, instructions are fulfilled by the browser. Basically, browser fulfills the instructions or executes the instructions on fly as we go. Okay, pretty much like it's done on synchronous interpreters on the United Nations. But also, we have another possibility to employ an interpreter and provide him the material which should be translated in advance, right? So in that case, we can actually convert the text into the machine code, or with other words, with another language in advance. So basically, the quality of the translation will be definitely much higher. Besides that, you'll have time to distribute this printed material. Okay, so that's the difference. So you pay the price. Okay, you have to be prepared in advance. You have to compile that. But on the other hand, the quality will be much higher. Okay, and definitely that will cost you less because synchronous interpreters definitely cost more. They ask more. And then last but not least is JavaScript is free. So you don't need to pay any royalty or buy any application or software, whatever. It's actually as is. It's embedded in basically as browser understands JavaScript, we don't need to buy any additional application. It's pretty much free as browser is. Okay. Next thing which we are going to cover is object-oriented programming, because JavaScript is, like it or not, but it's object-oriented programming, and you have to know at least the surface of what it is in order to understand the code. Okay, so that's why we're going to cover this object-oriented code up to the bare minimum to understand what JavaScript can do and cannot do. So you probably heard this abbreviation OOP, or object-oriented programming, in different contexts, but probably never had an idea what is it about. Okay, so essentially, this object-oriented programming is a methodology. Okay, it's not a language itself; it's a methodology. It's basically a way to program. Okay, so definitely the kind of a set of rules how to program. Okay, and this can be implemented in different languages, provided that the language should support object-oriented programming. And JavaScript is object-oriented programming. It supports that. So that's why we have to learn how it works. Okay. So for simplicity reasons, just to illustrate the concept, I took an example of a bank which has some branches. And then this is, we can imagine that this is a headquarters of the bank, which might not be the case nowadays, because after the crisis. But anyway, let's assume one of the buildings in Manhattan is a headquarters. And this bank may have different branches across the country. Now, if we allow, and then besides that, we should focus only on these 4 operations in the bank. So bank branch can deposit money, so it can accept cash, checks and cash, do ATM functions, cash out, loan application acceptance, accept loan applications from the customers, and definitely issue consumer loans. Okay, well limited to these 4 operations, but you should realize that in reality we may have more operations like these 4. Okay, so listed here. Now, question is that if we allow each bank branch in each state hire their own developers and implement these functions, how to write these functions, that will be the end to the banking industry, to that bank in particular, but generally to the banking industry, because developers will implement it differently, and then in some states people will soon find out that some states it's very easy to get loans, right? They will rush there, and there will be some discrepancies. Basically, it's no go. We should not allow to do that to happen. So we have to put standards there. We have to standardize these operations and make sure that all these operations executed exactly the same way. Doesn't matter when this operation, when this bank branch is located. Definitely, there might be some small deviations like tax rate or additional fees and so on. But in general, so speaking, these 4 operations should be done the same way. Okay. Now, in order to see how we can enforce these standards, because it doesn't matter how many documents and emails you send, definitely they will not be the same. If you hire a different group of people. So they pay their attention the way how the printing industry was working, and this is an illustration of bank headquarters and bank branches. How printing industry was operating a while ago, like so may say half a century ago, even more than that. So and that's how the printing industry was invented actually 500 years ago. What happens is that they actually manufactured a lot of LED sticks, which are shown here in a hand, and each LED stick has a letter engraved on the top. For example, if you look at this LED stick here, this one, okay, the letter is engraved at this position on the top, And this is the top, looking from the top on these letters. Okay, these letters are, filed in the cabinets, kind of a very heavy lead cabinets. And this is how they look like. So basically, you have cabinets full of different letters of different sizes and different styles. And if they need to print a book, then there are specially trained operators who actually, with the hand or with the pincet, just actually taking this letter out of the cabinet, putting in a frame, and assemble this metallic page. Okay, page made of metal. Okay, that page would be very heavy, you imagine, because it's a metal, right? It's a lead. But they fix these letters, and then what happens is that they apply a dye stuff, just in color, on top of these letters, and then they apply paper. After that, this color was transferred from these letters to the paper, and that's how book page was printed. In order to print the whole book, you see, you may imagine that it may involve a lot of work and a lot of time. Okay, but that's the way to do that. And then these letters actually should be replaced from time to time, because leather is not very durable material, but it's soft enough to absorb dye stuff and then interact with the paperwork. And then this technology was replaced gradually because lead was actually a poisonous substance and definitely not prolong human life, okay, lifespan. So with the time, they actually made also rubber letters, letters made of rubber, and this is actually the printing enthusiast at Harvard University. So you see that they assemble some text using these big rubber letters, and then they should assemble mirror image of the page, actual page. So this is actually very tedious work. And after they assemble that, they have to fix that. After fixing, they apply blue color on the top of these letters, and then after that they apply a piece of paper, and using this technique you can produce as many copies as you want. Each copy will be exact the same copy as other, and then exactly mirror image of this rubber page, kind of. Okay, and assuming that we have enough dye stuff and enough paper, we can produce a lot of copies. And if you're very tedious, you can actually mark and number these copies if you need to. Okay, you can actually, but that you have to do by hand, or you have to implement some counter here, mechanical one, which will increment the counter. Okay, but basically that's how it is done. And then you realize that each copy here is exactly the same as others, and exact mirror copy of this rubber page. Same principle can be applied to the software industry, and that was actually basis of the object-oriented programming. So what we do actually, we create a matrix, we can say a rubber matrix, kind of, which will implement all function, business rules, and so on, and including these 4 operations which we mentioned before, and then you define there. Okay, you say this is our matrix, and this is how this operation should be done. Okay. But you cannot use this matrix itself, pretty much like you cannot use this matrix, rubber matrix, in order to post advertisement on outside of the in the city, right? You have to make a copy and then only apply this copy to some, some message boards and so on. Pretty much the same here. You can create this matrix in software, but you cannot use that matrix itself. You have to make copies of it. Okay, because that software will not allow you to do this. Okay, so you have to create the copies and then send copies to each bank. And after doing that, each bank branch will receive its own copy of the software, which will allow to do these operations. And after receiving this branch, after installing on the machines, then in order to issue a loan, we can issue this command. So issue loan command is generic. It's actually put in a matrix, and it's defined in a matrix. This, for example, Nashville branch has nothing to do with that. They cannot alter that. They cannot do anything with that. But since this command is issued at the Nashville office, branch, we have to use this syntax. We say Nashville.issue loan. So what it means is that we are working at the Nashville branch, and this command is executed at the Nashville branch, issue loan. Okay, so and then this command is executed pretty much exactly the same as it will be executed on any other state. Okay, but we have to distinguish where it is issued by defining this branch, okay, which comes first. You see that the dot operator, which distinguishes between this branch and the command itself, that's also specific to the object-oriented syntax. Okay. Any questions? No. So issue a loan command is not enough to issue a loan, because you cannot say give me a loan, right, or issue a loan. You have to be very specific. And what it means is that we have to provide additional information for this operation to be meaningful and in order that operation could complete. So in this particular case, I have to provide two pieces of information at least. I have to provide user ID or customer ID at the bank, right, whom this loan is going to, and amount of the loan, right? So this information is provided within the parentheses and is separated by comma. It's actually, it's misleading, but this is a pseudocode. This is not real code. So the parameters are separated by comma, okay? So in this case, we actually reading this line the following. So Nashville bank branch issued the loan to the customer 12, and the loan amount is 50,000. Okay, that's how it looks like. Without this information, this command cannot be executed. Okay, and that's how the issue loan is defined in the matrix in the central bank branch. Okay, so any questions about this? No. Okay, so this is an explanation of what we already said. It's not a big deal. And then if we are talking about also some other bank branch, like for example Orlando bank branch, that will be the same. Orlando dot issue loan and so on. And that operation will be executed exactly the same way as it's in the Nashville. Also, you may realize that in order to operate with these loans and taking other operations, in real life, bank has also some cash registers, right, at the bank branches, okay, where the small sum of money is stored. Okay, so this is said to be a private data, private information, which belongs to each individual bank branch. So what it means is that if it's private, it does not mean it's not accounted for. Okay, it is counted, but central office does not have direct access to the registers. So that's why it's called private data. Okay, so in order to get information about that, typically what happens is that they may call manager of that bank branch, say, you know what, how much cash you have in the registers, okay? Or they may have some other mechanism, but they cannot have direct access to these cashier registers. That's why it's called private information, and that's also in principles of the object-oriented programming. Okay, we have public data and we have also private data. Okay, cash register information is in this case will be private information. Next concept which we are going to cover is, we're done with the object-oriented programming. Next concept is variables, which is very important, and they exist in all programming languages. No programming language can exist without these variables, with concept of variables. So this is official definition of the variable, which would not tell you much, okay, but just for official for the records, I just put here, okay. But but in reality, what variable is essentially a container which allows us to separate two processes in time. That happens pretty much and every day in your real life too, when you take your mail from mailboxes. Okay, so what happens is that we have a container which is associated with your address or your name, and that container is used by you and used by postal office. Okay, and there are two distinct processes happening. First process is postal office deliver your mail, and they deliver at a time when they feel comfortable for them or where they can. Okay, we cannot put pressure on that. Okay, second process is actually taking your mail from a mailbox, which may happen again at any moment of time, not even this today, or maybe you may decide to take it tomorrow, right? So these are two processes which are separated in time. The mailbox actually connects these two processes together, okay? In a sense that it allows us to transfer of information from one process to another, essentially your mail. If we don't have this mailbox, then the situation will be pretty ugly, because it means that we have to stay in front of the door until 11 or 12 at noon, right? Wait until mailman, probably chat a little bit with him or her, take your mail and go home and to work, which is very inconvenient, right? And then if they have a huge delivery, I mean a huge mail that day, your mail may be delayed a little bit, okay? So which is very inconvenient for you. And also postal office is completely uninteresting when you take your mail, okay? They don't care about that as soon as you take it at least once a week, okay? Your mailbox is not jammed, okay? But they don't care about that. So we have two different processes which are completely related to each other, except that this piece of information, your mail, connect them together, okay? Pretty much the same happens in the computer world. In the computer, when we may have tons of different processes, and one process may generate some information, and we need to keep that information somewhere. If we don't do that, then information will be gone. Pretty much like if you don't have your mailbox, that your mail will be gone, right? If mailbox, I mean, if a postman will come and just throw your mail on the floor, wind may come, just swap your, take away your mail. Pretty much here, we should have some container which will keep information obtained from one process, so this information can be used by other processes, processes. Okay, so we may have, actually, we may rely on temporary storage of information. Okay, that's what we're talking about. And this piece of information, this mailbox, is called variable. That's what it is. Okay, it's basically you can regard it as a mailbox. Okay, but in a computer, sitting in a computer. Now, the mailboxes, even if they are numbered there, you don't care about the number of mailbox. You care about your name or your address, right? As soon as it's printed. But for postal office, they may have different numbering. Okay, they may have put a huge number so they know which the mailbox they're talking about, irregardless of person who actually first name, last name, or address. Okay, pretty much the same happens in the computer world. Basically, when we create these containers in the memory, and these containers live in memory, in operational memory, not on a hard drive, but in operational memory. Computer actually gives the addresses associated with these mailboxes, but that address is pretty ugly because it contains a lot of digits, okay, and not very easy to remember. Okay, so if you rely on the computer numbering, then you're out of luck. Okay, that will be very difficult to work with. So instead of that, computer gives you that possibility to name it the way you like it. Okay. So in that case, we are talking about variable name. Okay? Internally, computer associated the name which you give to the container to the internal long number, but that should be not interesting for you, completely uninteresting for you. Okay? So, when we're declaring a variable, when we create this container in the memory, we usually typically use alphanumeric strings because that's easier for human being to read and to work with. Okay? Any questions about this? Okay, so JavaScript definitely supports variables, and here are examples of that. In order to create the variable, actually reserve space in the memory, it's done pretty easily. I use keyword var, which is optional. Unfortunately, it's optional. And I use some letters, something which should start with a letter, not number. And in this particular case, I created a space in memory, which I call it D. Internally, computer may call it, say 10-digit number or whatever, but I don't care about that. Because for me, it exists as a D, for computer it exists something for something else, but they are linked to each other. Computer remembers that, okay, the linkage. And in this case, when I declare, when I write these two words here, var and D, essentially I create a memory spot in the memory. And then, but at that moment, it does not contain anything. Essentially, I create a space in the memory, but I don't put anything there. So it means that there is a vacuum there. No number, no space, no air, no silicon, just vacuum. Okay. Next thing which I can do is I can create a variable as before. In this case, variable name is DAT, that, and also say put equal sign and number 1. What it means in the computer world, it means that I put value 1 into this container, into the mailbox. Okay, so this operation is called assignment. When I use equal sign, it's assignment operator. But at the same time, you realize that I create this variable here, right? So basically, on this line, I have two operations performed. One, I created the variable, and second operation is I assign the variable at the same time on the same line. So it calls initialization, when you create a variable and immediately assign it. Okay, so this is actually a very, very good way of programming because you guarantee that the variable is not empty, is not vacuum there. Okay. Next thing, yeah, welcome. Okay, I'm going slowly to beat Selenium class. Okay. Okay. So next thing which I can do, I can create another variable. Essentially, JavaScript allows you to create as many variables as you need, or even more than that. This is another example when I create a variable which I call car 12. Maybe it's car number 12, maybe it's parking lot number 12, who knows. But I assign actually to the value to Honda. And observe here that in the first case, when I'm assigning numeric values here, I don't use double quotes. When I use alphabetic string, or actual string, that should be encapsulated in the double quotes. Because if you don't do that, then JavaScript may think that a Honda is another variable. Okay, it will try to find that Honda variable, could not find it, and will be perplexed. Okay, so there will be an error. So this is actually literal string. It basically consists of letters, and as such, it should be encapsulated with the double quotes, and each line should be end with the semicolon. Okay. Again, this is not a requirement, but highly desirable. And then again, in this case, we actually define a variable and create a variable and assign value to it. So when you create a variable, you should not instruct JavaScript what kind of information you are going to store there. Okay? Unlike many other programming languages, this is not required. That's why it's called weak type language, or actually loose type. Also, some people say loose type. So you don't need to predefine type of the information you are going to store. I'm not, when I'm creating variable DAT, I'm not saying that I'm going to store numeric values there, okay? Or when I'm creating car 12, I should not declare saying, you know what, this variable car 12 will contain string, or basically information which is encapsulated in double quotes, okay? There is no need for that, okay? Absolutely no need. Basically, you are free of doing whatever you like. Create a variable, assign anything you like, you feel comfortable with, okay? Yes?
So you use the VAR as a declaration for stating you're creating a variable?
VAR, this is a keyword which is actually unfortunately not mandatory. So it means that if you use it or not use it, you'll get the same effect, okay? But it's highly desirable when you create a variable, use it, because in that case you actually indicate to JavaScript that this is a variable which did not exist before, which haven't existed before, and I'm going to create these variables, okay? When you don't use it, then it's indication to the JavaScript that this variable had been declared before, and I'm just simply reassigning, putting new value into them, okay?
So the very first instance of creating a variable, you have to declare it with
It's desirable. It's very, I mean, I urge you to do that. It's not a requirement, because if you don't do that, JavaScript will not complain and there will be no error. But it's very good coding style, because you are telling essentially that this is the first usage of the variable, it's the actual creation of the variable. Okay? Other languages will require that. It will be mandatory there, but unfortunately not here. Okay? Why they don't do that, I don't know. Okay. So another thing is that in the future version of Java, this const keyword will be also provided. This is actually in the case when the value of the variable is not supposed to change, okay? So essentially, for example, if you're working with a temperature conversion, for example, application, you can use this variable freezing point in Fahrenheit and assign to value 32. And this freezing point is not going to change, okay? At least not in observable future, okay? Unless we have different atmospheric pressure. But this is actually what it is, okay? On a sea level, this is the freezing point of water, and it's not going to change. So that's why we like to underline this feature, saying, you know what, so this is called variable, and we assign value 32, but we are not allowing its value to be changed, okay? It's not making any sense, so that's why we're kind of making constant, or actually not changing, okay? By adding this const keyword, okay, to it. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So basically, this is what briefly about the variables, which we already covered. And then variable, as the name suggests, may change actually the value which they contain. For example, in this case, it contains this variable DAT contains 1, but in the future I may change its value, but just kicking out one and substituting for something else. This happens constantly, all the time, so it's not kind of unusual. So that's what the name also may suggest. Okay. So okay, and JavaScript definitely supports variable, because without variables, no programming is possible at all. Rules for naming variables are very simple, and it's very easy to follow. So variable names are case sensitive. Essentially, if you declare two variables which are different only by case, like this small z and the capital Z, these are two different variables. But it's a very bad practice to to create two variables which will be different from each other only by case. Okay, don't do that. Okay, so it's very easy to make a mistake, especially if you have a very weird font installed on your editor, which may actually not be able to easily distinguish between lowercase and the capitalized one. Variable name should begin with must begin with a letter or underscore character, but not a number. Okay, that's not allowed. That's pretty much it. Okay, so here is assignment operations, which we particularly covered previously. So in this case, I created a variable x and assigned a value of 11 to it. I created a variable city and assigned address to it. And the same two lines which are shown here can be rewritten this way. The difference is that I omitted a keyword var. Okay, this will work too. Okay, so there will be no error as issued. But you realize that this syntax is much better if I declare variable x for the first time and the variable city also. Because in this case it's not clear. Is variable x or variable city, these variables are created, or they were basically reused. They were created before and I'm reusing them. It's not clear. In this particular case, it's pretty much clear, because this is the very first time I am using variable x, so I have to declare it. Okay, so follow that syntax style. It's actually very easy to do, and makes code maintenance easier, much easier. Okay. Any questions? No? Okay. So better ask, because we are going to do exercises. Okay. So another question you may be asked in the interview is just local and global scope for the variables. Definitely we are going to cover that in detail. We're going to cover functions. This is basically the explanation of the concept. So JavaScript allows us to imagine that this is a code. Don't go deeper into this. Okay, we are not there yet. Okay, just imagine that we have a list of instructions here, and JavaScript allows us to get some instructions, pick up many instructions, and name it, that block. There's several instructions, and give a name to them. Okay, and this is the code block, and these instructions, which I like to specify and give a name, I separate using these curly brackets. Okay, essentially you may have instruction which is follow that, which is preceding that, but this block of instructions I called foo. Okay, now within foo, within this figural bracket, I created two variables which I called L and B. Okay, L is not assigned, B is assigned to 7. Okay, now as soon as I created this block, I have these two variables declared within the block, and as such they are called local ones. Okay, so also I have another variable which is declared outside of the block. In this case, variable is GL, and its value is 6. Okay, what happens is that JavaScript executes the statements. It comes from the top to the down. Okay, now it enters this block, and these variables are instantiated, or basically created, and then something happens here. As soon as these commands are executed, don't pay attention to that, just ignore it. Okay, at this very moment, just before exiting the block, this variable will be completely erased. Okay, they will be gone. Okay, so this variable GL will exist here, and it will exist here too, even if the block is executed. Okay, so because it's global, that's the difference between local and global ones. Okay, they may ask this question on the interview. I've seen that several times, so that's why I put this variable. But again, don't pay attention to the code. We are not there yet. So what we are going to do, we are going to create an HTML document, and we are going to put JavaScript there. So how we're going to do that, we are going to use HTML tag script, which is shown here. Okay, and in the next version of HTML, HTML5, this will not be required, but right now please use that. So you have to use script space type, and specify what kind of script it is. So that will be JavaScript, which is coming in a text format. And here, starting from this script, ending with this script, that will be completely JavaScript. No HTML here. Okay, starting from here, ending here, that will be JavaScript. Okay, outside of this script, we have standard HTML. So what you need to do, you need to go ahead and create this document, okay, and save it as HTML, and you should be able to open it in a browser. And then we'll walk over the code, see what it does, what it doesn't, and why it looks the way it is. Now, let's analyze this code, and let's see why this code printed the document the way we see it. Okay, it's actually very important. So, first of all, we declare two variables here in a JavaScript. So the document itself is HTML document, but nevertheless, this section of the code is JavaScript. Okay, it's JavaScript domain. So we created two variables here, var car mass_name_pv and var pi equals this one. And you don't need to, you don't see these variable statements printed in a browser. You don't, right? You don't see it. Okay. After that, we have statement which says document.write, whatever. As you may recall, when we were covering object-oriented programming, we say, you know what, this is the typical syntax of that. So we have to distinguish the object from its method. Okay. In this case, we have document.write. But what document is? Okay, that's a good question. So in a JavaScript world, the main window of the browser, when you open a browser and see the main window where everything happens, basically everything except toolbar or address bar, whatever, is called document. So basically this big window here, except this title, toolbar and so on. This window, which is, I put in the bold, is called document. This is called document. This is top-level object, and if you see any elements like push buttons, radio buttons, text, images, whatever, everything is sitting on the top of the under the document, because document is the top level. Okay, that it cannot be pretty much like if you have operation system on the Windows, everything is sitting on the C drive, right? There is nothing above the C drive, right? Pretty much the same here. This is the top level. This is the root. Okay. So after that, we have to look what this object or document can perform for us, okay, can do for us. And one of the methods is write. This is basically the operation which is called write. And what write operation does, it actually puts everything, whatever you like, on this screen. Okay? But also, again, you have to be very specific. If you like to put something, you have to be saying what you are going to put there. You have to say that explicitly. And that's what we do within the parentheses. Okay? This is the information which you like to put on the screen. Okay? In this case, the very first line, we say h1, angle bracket, first JavaScript, closing h1, is essentially an HTML code. Okay? So you may assume that this line should be put in the bold and bigger font size. Now, you put this, you print this, but the browser is smart enough to realize, okay, this information which is placed here is actually an HTML code, and behaves accordingly. So basically it interprets accordingly. So it puts first JavaScript script in a bigger, fatter font. Okay, that's what you should observe in the script. Next thing, which happens exactly the same, we say hello world and we say bye, and then after that we say value of pi is. Okay, and then what happens is this portion is understandable. This is basically the string. But then we say plus pi, and instead of the variable pi printed pi, we have its value printed here. Right? This value which I indicated here. This is another feature of the variable. When we are using the variable, computer actually is not using the variable itself, but it uses information which this variable contains. That's what we are creating variable for, right? We don't create variable for the sake of the variable, just jam the memory. We created variable so it stores information, and every time we call this variable or like to use it, we actually use this information which the variable contains. So it's pretty clear? Absolutely clear? Thing is that we use plus operator, which is a little bit strange here, right? Correct? We use plus operator to combine two pieces of information. One piece of information, this string value of pi is. Another piece of information is this one. correct? So in order to combine these two pieces of information, I use plus operator, which is look a little bit strange here, because I use plus operator only in situations when I like to add two numbers. It's actually in numeric context, right? But the context here is not numeric. It's essentially alphabetic context. It's a string context, correct? So it means that we have overloaded plus operator here. It's called operator overloaded. It means that in addition to its regular activity, regular action, adding two numbers together, it does additional stuff. In this case, it concatenates two strings, because that's a concatenation, okay? So that's why we're saying this operator is overloaded. This is another feature of object-oriented programming, okay? So think that way. So it may look strange, but it is. So if we like to concatenate two strings together, we use plus operator. Any other questions? Looks pretty straightforward. Okay. So this is an explanation what it does, what happened, which we already covered that. So we also can, in this particular case, there's no big deal, because what we did actually, we created two variables and assigned values and printed them. But the variable values may change as program executes. Okay. For example, if you can actually create a variable and then assign current temperature obtained from the machine, for example, current processor temperature. Okay, your processor in your machine, on the laptop or desktop, this temperature is available. Okay, if you like, you can get it programmatically, and then I can create a JavaScript which will obtain this temperature. And you realize that depending when I run, okay, what time of day I run or what temperature, I'll get the different values, okay? This value is kind of a hard-coded here, but it's not necessary. They might be also dynamic, okay? Or date and time, that also may change. If I assign variable, for example, create another variable, say DAT, and assign current date and time, definitely its value will change every time you run the script, right? Because time changes, right? Yes?
Pi value, it doesn't change, so we could have said constant.
Yes, you can, but typically what is done in the practice, we have a library in the JavaScript, embedded library, which is called math, and that math library contains this value. So I don't even need to remember these digits here. I simply can recall that. So what you can do is that if you don't like this, you can say math.pi. Okay? So in that case, you'll get this value. Okay? Immediately. So. Okay, so said that, it's basically illustration how we can use variables here. Okay, this is probably not very interesting script, because what it does, whatever we have achieved here can be achieved using HTML code, right? Basically providing these two values, hard coding in HTML code, and we'll be done. Okay, but the JavaScript is more than that. Okay, so what we can do is actually we can use JavaScript to validate the data, which is actually one of the most important usages of JavaScript. So what happens is that when you go and do online shopping, you will be asked at the end to provide your credit card information and home address and so on, billing address and so on. Now, assume that you make a mistake, which is more than probable, right, of doing that. So if you don't have on-fly validation, immediate validation, what happens is that when you click a button and say submit, this information is transferred to the server. Okay? The server has methods to validate this data. Is this data valid or not? In a sense that, for example, your first name should not contain digits, right? Or credit card number should be 16 digits. Or expiration date cannot be or expire date. Okay, it's just something like that. For example, you cannot say credit card expired 2010. Okay, it would not be valid. Okay, and a lot of errors which you can actually introduce in this submission form. But then server will detect this error and then send this form back to you, maybe highlighting some fields and so on. But what happens is that you would lose time, because time between submitting this information, getting response back, maybe say 10 seconds or 15 seconds, okay? And if you do a couple of errors, you'll be very angry after that, okay? So it is completely your mistake, it's not server mistake, but it's not done correctly, so you actually will be very angry, saying, you know what, I'm losing time ordering this item from here. So in contrary to that, if we implement on-the-fly validation, for example, like imagine that someone is standing behind the back, and every time you do some typo or whatever, you said, you know what, please correct this, please correct that, okay? That will be much better, right? So we might be irritated again, but getting a response will be much faster, okay? Because that person will verify that everything is intact correctly, and then when you submit the form, you'll definitely get okay from the server. And this man can be, a role of that man behind your back can be played by JavaScript, okay? What happens is that when you download the page, HTML page, which contains this validation form, or not, which contains the form which you have to fill out, together with that page, you also download the JavaScript, right? It's sitting in a HTML code. And then you can instruct JavaScript to validate all your inputs. And JavaScript can go ahead and validate that credit card number is 16 digits. It can validate that your first name does not contain digits. It can validate that the credit card expiration date is not dated back. What else we can validate? We can also validate that you enter your address correctly, your email address is valid format, and so on. Yeah. Basically, a lot of validation can be done, and that's where JavaScript is mostly used, okay, in HTML page. And actually, we are going to create validators, by the way. Okay, be ready for that. So JavaScript can be used to detect the visitor browser. This is actually very important in situations when your site does not support specific browser. Let's assume you develop your website for the Internet Explorer and Mozilla Firefox, but you ignore completely Safari or other browsers. Okay, it may happen. What happens in this case, when people visit your site using different browsers, different ones, results is unpredictable. Maybe you'll get a nasty error, you will see nasty error. Maybe functionality will be completely unavailable. In either case, this is not a pleasant experience. Okay? It will be much nicer if we detect the browser using JavaScript, because when we develop our page, we don't have our absolute control over who is going to visit our site, right? But we can actually encapsulate JavaScript into the HTML page, which will detect browser. Okay, it means that as soon as you open the browser, then the JavaScript will immediately detect that. And if we can instruct JavaScript the way that if this is not supported browser, then appropriate message will be shown, or alternative site will be shown. We can do that. Okay, so that's also another area where JavaScript is used. And then JavaScript also can be used to create cookies. We are going to cover cookies in the class which is called Testing Applications on the Web. And it can be used to either plant cookies or retrieve information from cookies. And many, many other usages, okay? Including the action to the events, which we are going to utilize that. So where JavaScript is located in HTML documents, typically it might be located in the body, it might be located in the head part, depending on the goals, okay? So in this case, in the body, as we did before, we say script, and then specify type, and then put some code here, and then closing script. And this document may contain, or typically contain, HTML code as well, basically text, images, streaming, and whatever. Okay. So it may be placed in a head part. So it means that when the page is loaded, JavaScript might be immediately executed. Okay, that's also another area where JavaScript is used. Okay, so we can also specify external file, put JavaScript in external file, and refer to that file as this one. For example, xxx.js. JS is extension for the JavaScript file source code. This should be space here. It's not visible here. Let me put that so it's visible. It might be some confusion. 26. Okay, this one should be space here. I put several spaces so it will be clear. Yeah, this is better. Okay, this will actually specify external file which contains JavaScript code. So JavaScript statements, actually how the JavaScript code is looks like. It's basically a statement is a compilation of commands, and these commands are executed by the browser, and that's what instruction to the browser what to do. Okay, the text of the command are written in the JavaScript code. Essentially, we have to learn how to code a little bit. And if the code is correct, then the browser will execute the command. If code is not correct, then some of you experience that nothing would happen. Okay. So JavaScript statements should always be terminated with a semicolon. It's not a requirement, but it's highly desirable. Okay. In that case, you may easily see that this distinct between two different statements. And essentially, it's a compilation, a sequence of JavaScript statements. And each statement is executed in the browser by the order they are written. Okay, we can change the order. We can have that possibility, but typically, I mean, if we don't do that techniques, then it will be executed the order they are written. Okay, JavaScript statements can be grouped using figural brackets, and we can also give a group a name. So the reason for that is actually allows us to utilize the code. If, for example, we need to execute some statements several times, we can give that statement block a name, and then basically call that block. Instead of just copying and pasting code, we can avoid that situation. And then the purpose of the block is just basically all statement which is contained in the block executed together. This is our first JavaScript, which we already did. We've seen the results. There is no need to go deeper into that. And then if you save this, you'll see the result as here. Plus, you definitely see also a couple of statements here. Values of the variables are printed. Okay, JavaScript can write text into the browser window and do a lot more actions than this. And then typically where we write JavaScript is an HTML code. So it's not a requirement. We can put an additional file, extra file, and refer that file. Okay, so you can use JavaScript emulator, navigate to this site, or you can use Notepad to create a JavaScript. Either way, okay, whatever is preferable for you, but this is possible. I haven't tested the HTML simulator which you download from Portnov school site. I'm not sure if it does support JavaScript or not. Okay, you may try that. I haven't tested it, so it might. Okay, so commenting JavaScript. Commenting the code is very important aspect. So it means that if you're in a business of analyzing or testing JavaScript code, you open the file and see a lot of JavaScript statements and absolutely have no idea what's going on, it means that's most probably that the code is not commented. So every code, regardless if it's JavaScript or other programming language, key portion of the code, key statements, should always contain comments. This is not a good gesture from the developer or kind of a practice of the company. This is a must, because nowadays what happens is that code which is written by developers typically is supported or maintained by other people than they created. Okay, so it means that other people who come and open your file, your code, should have immediate understanding what's going on and what this code is doing. Okay, if they don't have that, it means that it will be actually resulted in a time loss for the company, and which is equivalent to the money loss. So this is actually very serious, and if you don't see comments, not in a single comment in a code, open a defect immediately. If unless there is a very trivial code, okay. But if the code is more or less complicated and you have no understanding what's going on, require that the code will be commented. And I've seen in my life, I've seen the case when the developer was fired for not providing comments, okay, to the code. That's a real life example. Okay, so this is serious. And I also seen the situation when the engineers filed a defect, uncommented code, and that defect was immediately fixed. Okay, the developer provided comments. Okay, so how we do that in the JavaScript? Essentially, what you need to do is just put 2 forward slashes in the front of the line, and that line will be present in the code, but will be completely ignored by the browser. So if we do in our example, let's go to our example. Let's see how it's done.